Hello, dear traveller. Wherever you're listening from, whether it's midnight in Melbourne, dawn in Detroit, or somewhere in between, welcome. This is the Sleepy Side B, a place for soft stories from music's past. The songs you know and the ones you almost forgot, told slowly, gently, the way memory works when you're almost asleep. Before we begin, we would love to know where in the world you're listening from, and if there's a song from this era that's always stayed with you. This might be your first time here. It's ours too. So, settle in, let the day fall off your shoulders, and come drift through the music that moved us, one track at a time. You're flipping through a stack of records at a garage sale. The sleeves are worn. The labels are faded. And there it is, Willie and the Poor Boys, 1969. The moment you see it, you can already hear that first riff. Raw, fast, angry, but not loud enough to wake the neighbors. Fortunate Son is one of those songs you know, even if you don't remember learning it. It's been in war movies, game trailers, documentaries. It's the sound of protest. At least that's what people say. But the real story is quieter and a little more complicated. John Fogerty didn't write Fortunate Son to rage against the Vietnam War itself. He wrote it in 20 minutes after reading about a wedding. Not just any wedding. Julie Nixon, the daughter of President Nixon, was marrying David Eisenhower, the grandson of another president. A golden couple in a golden world. The kind of people who didn't get drafted. Fogerty, on the other hand, had been drafted. He joined the Army Reserve in 1966, and he hated it. He tried everything to get out. Fasting, sabotaging his own physicals, planting a syringe in his pocket before showing up at recruitment centers. It worked. He was discharged in 1968. So when he sang I Ain't No Senator's Son, he wasn't just guessing. He was telling the truth. The song wasn't meant to represent an entire war. It was meant to call out the unfairness behind it, the quiet, paper-pushing kind of injustice, the kind that decides who goes and who stays home. And here's something else you might not know. Fortunate Son never hit number 1. It peaked at number 3. It wasn't even Creedence's most successful song. But decades later, it became something bigger. Why? Because it was cheap to license. Movie studios needed a Vietnam song. And there it was. Raw, furious, familiar. It found its way into nearly every jungle helicopter scene you've ever watched. And later, when political campaigns tried to use it at rallies, Fogerty fought back. He said, "That ain't me." And this time, the world listened. The song ended up in the Library of Congress. It never stopped echoing. It's only 3 minutes long, but sometimes that's all it takes. The guitar fades. The rage quiets. Fortunate Son said what needed to be said in just 3 minutes. But now we shift from protest shouted loud to protest whispered beneath hotel sheets. In the next room of history, 2 people are lying in bed. And peace. It starts not with a riot, but with a pencil and a cardboard sign. You wake up in a hotel room, barely aware it's not a dream. It's June 1969, and you're in room 1742 at Montreal's Queen Elizabeth Hotel. Soft morning light slants through the window. John Lennon and Yoko Ono are still in their bed. This was their honeymoon weirdness, a week-long bed-in for peace where they refused to leave the covers and invited the world in. They weren't protesting war with signs or chants. They were doing it with pajamas, cameras, and conversation. They had signs above them, hairpiece, bedpiece. It wasn't starched or staged. It was sleepy and subversive. One of their guests was Rabbi Abraham Feinberg. He suggested the title, Give Peace a Chance. Within minutes, Lennon had scribbled the lyrics across cardboard sheets, passed among the dreamy crowd. That afternoon spilled into recording. Timothy Leary, Allen Ginsberg, Petula Clark, and Tommy Smothers shuffled around with guitars and tambourines. There was no bass drum. Someone kicked the bedroom door. There were no session musicians, just friends, journalists, and activists accidentally singing history. Lennon strummed acoustic guitar. He said the lyrics were just a can of soup. A simple hook for thousands who would repeat after him, "All we are saying is give peace a chance." Next day, they added 3 local Montreal singers for backup harmonies. That version became a single. It was the first solo single by a Beatle. It didn't top the US charts. It peaked at number 14 on Billboard. But in the UK, it hit number 2. And it quickly became more than a song. It became an anthem. On November 15, 1969, 500,000 protesters in Washington, D.C. sang it together, led by Pete Seeger, interspersing questions like, "Are you listening, Nixon?" throughout the chorus. Yet here's the quieter truth. When Lennon first released it, he credited it to Lennon and McCartney, even though Paul had no role. He later said he felt guilty. That co-credit was a teenage pact. But the song really belonged to Yoko Ono as much as to him. After Lennon's death in 1980, fans flocked to the Dakota Building, singing "Give Peace a Chance" outside. It recharted in the UK in 1981, peaked at number 33 that time. And decades later, in 2022 and 2023, it was broadcast simultaneously on hundreds of European stations as a protest to the Ukraine war. It lives again and again. Just a whispered plea, another layer. For some, it's boring. A chant repeated, a message delivered in bedroom acoustics. Some critics call it worthy, naive, even dull. But maybe that's the point. It wasn't meant to preach. It was meant to carry a moment. The record credited it to Plastic Ono Band, because the band didn't exist beyond that bed-in. They were echoing peace, not playing polished pop. By the early 1990s, a new peace choir version emerged, with 30-something artists including Cyndi Lauper, LL Cool J, and Michael McDonald dropping together for the Gulf War era. A cover meant to remind people that peace is never a one-person chorus. And here's something quietly poetic. Stephen Sammons, a 20-year-old photographer at the Bed-In, captured some of the first images of the event. His debut as a photojournalist. He never even sang on the record, but he still says the experience felt a bit surreal. What was born as a whisper in a hotel bed is now lodged in the halls of protest history. Simple lyrics, a dozen voices in a room. Sometimes that's enough. The song fades. The chant lingers. All we are saying is give peace a chance. But not everyone listened. The voices calling for peace were met with rifles. And on a college campus not long after, it wasn't a song that echoed through the air. It was gunfire. This next story isn't a memory you fall asleep to. It's one you remember in silence. Because peace didn't come to Ohio. You can almost taste the morning air drifting across Kent State University on May 4th, 1970. There's no calm yet. Just the tension of a campus reeling from secret war orders to invade Cambodia. That tension crackles like static in the trees. By noon, about 3,500 students have gathered. They sing. They chant. A line of tear gas smokes in the air, thrown back by defiant hands. And then the wind shifts. Without warning, 67 shots are fired. 4 students lie dead, 9 more injured. Some were just walking to class. A photographer captures the body of a young woman. The image spreads like a tremor across the country. Neil Young sees the photo in Life magazine. It stays with him. He walks outside. By the time he returns, Ohio is written, 20 minutes from image to lyric. Tin soldiers and Nixon coming. The words land like gravestones. That evening, the band rushes to record it. No time for polish, no interest in filters. Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young walk into the studio on May 23rd. The track is recorded, mixed and pressed in a matter of days. Atlantic Records sends it straight to radio, while their other single is still on the charts. During the final take, David Crosby cries. You can hear his voice on the fade-out. A whisper. How many more? Why? It wasn't scripted. It just slipped through. The song mentions the president by name. A bold move for 1970. Some stations refuse to play it. Others put it on repeat. It peaks at number 14, but it spreads far beyond the charts. It becomes something heavier. Here's what most people don't know. Chrissie Hynde was there that day. So were Mark Mothersbaugh and Jerry Casale, future members of Devo. They said the tragedy changed the way they saw America and their art. Stephen Stills writes the B-side, Find the Cost of Freedom. It's a slow, mournful piece, less direct, but just as haunted. Years later, the band returns to Kent State. They perform the song live, soft and stripped down, under a grey Ohio sky. And in another decade, Ohio is reborn again, covered by a new generation of voices. Sadder now, slower, but still echoing with a question. How many more? Some songs explain history, others let it speak for itself. This was one of those. The crowd fades, the shouting stops, but the weight of loss lingers, heavy in the silence that follows. What came next wasn't another chant or another headline. It was something quieter, something personal. A man asked a question the world couldn't answer. What's going on? You're sitting in a dimly lit studio in Detroit. Late spring of 1970. A bass line hums in the background. The air is heavy with cigarette smoke and the weight of something broken. A Motown legend has just lost Tammy Terrell, his duet partner and creative soulmate. Marvin Gaye is hurting, torn between grief, fame, and silence. Nearby, his brother Frankie has just returned from Vietnam, haunted by what he witnessed overseas. Those conversations weigh on Marvin more than any record deal ever could. Along the way, a songwriter named Ronaldo Obi Benson witnesses chaos in Berkeley. Police clash with students at People's Park. They call it Bloody Thursday. Afterward, he asks, "What's going on here?" That question echoes in his mind, eventually making its way into Marvin's studio. When Marvin heard the skeleton of that song, he didn't walk away. He leaned in. He added melody. He shaped it with his grief. He gave the lyrics a voice that sounded like a prayer and a protest. He took it to Motown's head, Berry Gordy. Gordy called it the worst thing he ever heard in his life. It wasn't love songs. It was uncomfortable honesty. But Marvin refused to back down. He walked out, held his peace, held his stance, until the song was released. He produced it himself. He played saxophone over it. He even told a musician to go home where the riff felt too rehearsed. "You goof off exquisitely," he said. One of the bass lines ended up on the floor, played by James Jamison, lying down amidst the chaos, still nailing it. It wasn't just a song. It was his first solo single. It didn't top the charts. It peaked at number 2 in the UK and number 4 in the US. On its 40th anniversary, critics still said it changed everything. It turned soul music into activism, made the political personal, made Marvin more than a crooner. He became a conscience. The album? It didn't just hold that title track. It held a universe, songs about inner city death, environmental collapse, economic injustice, Marvin confronting climate before it was a concept. He crafted what's now hailed as the first true concept album in Motown, and maybe in soul. In response to the album, Marvin considered quitting music altogether to pursue football. He even tried out for the Detroit Lions. But he stayed, because the world needed the questions more than touchdowns. Spike Lee tapped his unfinished a cappella demo for the film Da 5 Bloods, Marvin's voice alone, with no strings. a battered truth echoing decades later on screen. In that film, black veterans fight battles foreign and domestic. Marvin's voice answers with one question. What's going on with that? This song wasn't meant to soothe. It was meant to wake you up. It starts soft, but by the time those chords roll in, you're wide awake in the moment. It feels less like music, more like a memory you keep hearing. Quiet, probing, patient. And maybe that's the point. The questions echo, but no answers come. Marvin didn't give us a solution. He just gave us permission to ask. But sometimes the questions don't need answers. Sometimes they're the song. Let's go back a little further now. One man, one guitar, a notebook full of riddles, and a voice, like sandpaper against silence. The next story begins not with a headline, but with a whisper, because the answer, it's still blowing in the wind. You're sitting in a small Greenwich Village club, barely aware of the smoke swirling overhead. It's the spring of 1962. Bob Dylan steps up to a dim spotlight, holding a chord chart that barely feels finished. One of the songs he plays that night, before most people had heard of him, is Blowin' in the Wind. But he didn't write it all alone. In the basement of Gerda's Folk City, a folk singer named Gil Turner hears it first. Turner learns it from Dylan's scribbled sheet music, then steps on stage and performs it before Dylan does. That was the debut. Soon after, the lyrics appear in Broadside magazine. Peter, Paul and Mary pick it up and release it weeks later, and their version climbs all the way to number 2. Dylan's own version never cracks the charts, but the questions live on. The melody wasn't invented, it was inherited. Dylan later admitted that it borrowed its rhythm from an old Negro spiritual called No More Auction Block. He wasn't hiding it. He just never cited it in the liner notes. The song's refrain, "The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind," wasn't always deep. Dylan said it was purposefully vague. Either the truth is so obvious we miss it, or it's so elusive we never catch it. By 1963, the song's everywhere, in folk clubs, student protests, and even in church hymnals across America. Some schools refused to teach Shakespeare, and instead taught Blowin' in the Wind to quiet kids in class. By the mid-60s, it was a global anthem. But here's something quieter. Stevie Wonder covered the song in 1966, when he was only 16. It reached number 9 on Billboard and made him one of the first black artists to hit the top 10 with a protest song not written by Motown. He risked his career to let it breathe. Through the civil rights movement and Vietnam War, Pete Seeger often led crowds in chanting the lyrics at rallies. Artists like Sam Cooke heard it and felt compelled to respond. Cooke's "A Change Is Gonna Come" was partly written because he knew Blowin' in the Wind was stirring something deeper in the world. Decades later, Dylan re-records it for pureblood analog format, titled Ionic Original, the first major new format in 60 years. That disc later sells for over $1 million. The song still blows through time like a gust no walls can hold. It's only 3 verses long, but sometimes the best questions don't need answers. They just need the wind to carry them. Sometimes the question is the song. The wind quiets. The question drifts. Some answers never come. Some. We stop asking, but what happens when the tension doesn't shout? It just hums under the surface? When protest doesn't come with headlines, but with a slow swell of footsteps and unease in the night. The next song wasn't written for a war. It was written for a curfew. A moment in Los Angeles that barely made the papers, but never left the record. The street is dark and quiet just after curfew. You step onto Sunset Boulevard in late 1966. There are no club lights yet, only the distant hum of restless groups spilling out of the Whiskey A Go-Go. Teenagers with guitars, fashion rebels. It's late for everyone, but illegal for some. Loitering signs are plastered on every corner. Policemen in helmets line the street. You can feel how close calm is to chaos. Stephen Stills is there. He writes most of the protest songs, not in a riot or on a battlefield, but on the strip where they tried to close a club. It wasn't a war, it was a curfew. He hears chants, voices pushed back into silence. So he writes a song in 15 minutes, sits down at Topanga Canyon and asks, "What's happening here?" He calls it for what it's worth. Not stop. "Hey, what's that sound?" That subtitle came from an executive, so people would recognize the chorus. But the title itself, it was modest, almost self-deprecating. Like Stills was saying, "What I'm about to say, take it or leave it." They recorded at Columbia Studios on December 5th, 1966. Nobody fusses over perfection. Soundboard clicks, Neil Young's chiming harmonics. Stills sings, steady and low. They rush it to radio. That same week it's already on KHJ in LA before it even hits the Hot 100. It's weird, calm and eerie. It peaks at number 7. The B-side? Do I Have to Come Right Out and Say It? But no one remembers that one. Despite never charting everywhere or being overtly political, it became a generational anthem because the uncertainty in Stills' line, that uncertainty still lives. Famous faces were at that protest. Jack Nicholson, Peter Fonda, once handcuffed by police that night. Future shock artists burning inside, Mark Mothersbaugh and Chrissie Hynde, would grow from that unrest. The song spreads quietly, heard on AM, but embraced on FM. Later covered by ecclesiastical voices like the Staple Singers, rock icons like Rush, and sampled by Public Enemy in their film, He Got Game. In 1997, Stephen Stills performed it at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with Tom Petty and other legends, proving the song outlived any era it tried to pin. It was written for a protest that barely made the news, recorded in 15 minutes, rushed to radio in days. Not about war, it was about youth, rights and quiet resistance, and in its own soft way, it asked the question. Across decades, generations, protests. Stop. Hey, what's that sound? Sometimes the most pointed protest is a whisper you almost don't hear. Sometimes the best stories are found in the stillness. The whisper fades. The street clears. The moment passes. But the question stays behind. Something was happening, but no one ever said what. And somewhere else, far away, the war kept going, not in headlines anymore, but in living rooms, on evening news broadcasts. And through the static, one voice didn't sing, it declared. Loud, surreal, unapologetically strange. The next story is not about what we saw, but what we were shown, and what we chose to forget. It's late autumn of 1967. Jim Morrison visits the tomb of the unknown soldier in Arlington Cemetery, just steps from where he'll perform at the Hilton Hotel. He stands in silence before a nameless hero. In his mind, he hears cadence, not just history, but a question. Back in the studio later that winter, the band heads into Waiting for the Sun sessions. They're pushed by producer Paul Rothchild's obsession, taking over 130 takes on just half the song. Each repetition builds tension. A literal breath before the silence breaks. The untitled track becomes The Unknown Soldier, a sonic confrontation you weren't meant to like. It opens with quiet lines about breakfast tables and television rooms, where war is watched like a show. Then, something shifts. Military snare drums march in. A soldier is led to an imaginary execution. The sound of a rifle firing echoes. Jim collapses. And then, he rises. The Doors made it theatre. Guitarist Robbie Krieger would point his guitar like a rifle. Densmore would hit a rim shot with such force it broke his stick. Morrison would fall. Then rise, declaring it's over. War is over. The song is controversial. Many radio stations banned it in 1968. Still, it peaks at number 39 in the US, a rare protest hit on mainstream airwaves. Here's something quieter. The event isn't about Vietnam alone. It's about how war enters your living room, how soldiers become silhouettes on the news, how execution becomes broadcast. Another layer you might miss. Jim's father was an admiral, and yet he didn't see his own battle until he stood in Arlington. They shot a promotional film in 1968, one of the earliest rock music videos. It shows Morrison tied to a rusted pier, mock executed on a beach shot by shot. It debuted before Doors shows at Fillmore East. It lived in VHS boxes for decades before going viral. Paul Rothchild later called it a science project gone rogue. John Densmore remembers marching in the studio and firing blanks for effect. They even simulated crowd cheers and chapel bells in the track's fade-out. Critics called it apocalyptic. Cashbox praised its sheer passion. Time dubbed it a philippic, a fierce denunciation of war. And though it's only 3 minutes long, it feels cinematic. It sounds less like rock and more like a confession. A staged ritual that cuts through the static. Some say it's less subtle than Light My Fire or Hello, I Love You. But it's also the moment the Doors became more than illusions. They became an artistic reckoning. It's not just a song. It's a broadcast you can't turn off, even if you need to close your eyes to survive it. The gunfire fades, the screen goes dark, but outside the broadcast, the world keeps turning. Not slower, not softer, just closer to the edge. The next voice didn't whisper. It rang like a church bell cracking in the wind, a warning set to a backbeat, a countdown dressed as a chorus, and a reminder that protest can sound loud, even when it's coming from a broken heart. It's a Thursday morning in Los Angeles, 1965. Inside a small studio, Barry McGuire walks in with a crumpled piece of paper. The ink is fading. The lines are uneven. It's not polished, but he says he's ready to sing. The band behind him, the Wrecking Crew, lays down a simple groove. Drums, a soft guitar, harmonica. Barry sings it once. No second takes, no vocal retouches, no do-overs. That raw version, the one with a missed lyric and an unpolished ah, goes straight to radio the same night. No promotion, no warning, just truth, cut to tape. Within a week, it climbs to number 1, knocks the Beatles out of the top spot. 6 million copies sold, a wildfire dressed in folk. But the backlash comes fast. Stations ban it. Critics call it dangerous. It's accused of being un-American, unpatriotic, even irresponsible. But Barry McGuire sees it differently. He doesn't call it a protest song. He calls it a love song, a desperate prayer for humanity to slow down. The lyrics hit like headlines. Selma, Vietnam, the draft. You're old enough to kill, but not for votin'. It was the first pop song to say what the news only hinted at. Here's something quieter. The Byrds were offered the song first. They turned it down. The Turtles recorded it too, but it was McGuire's voice that cut through. The song's writer, P.F. Sloan, was just 19 when he wrote it. Inspired by Dylan, but sharper, more blunt, more afraid. The song sparks a wave of response songs. The Dawn of Correction, Ballad of the Green Berets. It was proof the culture was arguing with itself, one vinyl at a time. Decades later, McGuire revisits the lyrics. He rewrites it for Columbine, for war, for wildfires, because he says the eve never really passed. Even today, it still sounds like a countdown. The song is only 3 minutes long, but it carries decades on its back. And in every generation, someone listens for the first time and feels like it was written yesterday. That's the power of a warning. That's the weight of a whisper. Eve of Destruction didn't try to change the world. It just tried to wake it up. The countdown ends, the warning fades, and still, the fire doesn't stop. What happens when the warnings are ignored, when the suits in high places send soldiers into silence, but never into battle? The next voice doesn't come from the folk clubs. It comes from the underground, from amplifiers cracked wide open. This story isn't told in verses. It's carved in riffs, and it doesn't ask questions. It names names. Next up is the sound of rage, disguised as metal. You close your eyes in a dim rehearsal room in early 1970. The ceiling creaks. The amp hums. A riff slowly builds. Heavy, ominous, inevitable. Black Sabbath is layering that riff over silence, slowly weaving a melody that feels like thunder in slow motion. They've been jamming it into shape in Europe, on American Air Force bases actually, before they even had a name for it. The song was originally called Walpurgis, referencing an occult celebration of dark forces. Geezer Butler intended it as a metaphor. War equals ultimate evil. Sorcerers of death constructing chaos. But the label balked, so it became War Pigs. Same lyrics, same accusation, just more readable in copy. When it finally appears as the opening track on Paranoid, their second album, it's almost 8 minutes long. 3 verses, a siren crash, a final riff that morphs into an instrumental outro called Luke's Wall. Most people think of War Pigs as a Vietnam protest anthem. It is, but it's also something broader, a cacophony erupting from the undercurrents, where power silences pain. Pressing issues of the time, Vietnam, conscription, political indifference, weren't far from their minds, but instead of marching or shouting, they wrote a dirge, slow, heavy, relentless. The single peaked, sure, but not wildly high in the US. It was banned on some stations for sounding too aggressive. Still, it found its way into bedroom radios, underground scenes, and record collections tinkering with counterculture. Here's something lesser known. On stage, they altered lyrics live. The version at BBC in 1970 pulsed differently than the album cut. At one performance, Bill Ward broke a drumstick from sheer force. Tony Iommi later said, the riff originated from one of those long jam nights when they had to fill set lists creatively. Producer Roger Bain and engineer Tom Allom added the air raid siren and sped up the tempo at the song's end, with or without the band's final say, but the band kept it. That outro section feels apocalyptic. The ticking after the noise settles. The legacy of War Pigs is surprising. It's still covered by artists of all genres. Faith No More, Sacred Reich, Cake, even T-Pain on an album of covers. All with something new to say through that heavy serpentine riff. Even Ozzy Osbourne publicly praised recent covers, calling one the best ever, but urged younger artists to ask permission. He took ownership of a song that once seemed uncontrollable. War Pigs doesn't ask questions, it points them. It wasn't written as a protest ballad, it was written as indictment. A surreal judgment day, soundtracked by distorted guitar and a whisper that grows into roar. It's almost 8 minutes long, but somehow shorter than the time it takes to unravel what it means. And in the quiet aftermath, all you're left with is that riff. Distant, relentless, and so damn necessary. The guitar fades, the siren dies out, the storm rolls back, but the question still hangs in the air. What is war really good for? The next voice doesn't whisper. It doesn't wonder. It shouts. It answers. And it says what millions were already thinking, out loud. Because sometimes protest doesn't need poetry. It just needs a horn section. You're walking into Detroit's quiet studio in early summer, June 1970, but the air tastes like unease. A Motown session is about to begin. There's a song waiting, but nobody's sure who will sing it. It was originally recorded by The Temptations on their psychedelic Shack album. Motown got thousands of letters begging, "Release War" as a single. But the label hesitated. They saw The Temptations as polished symbols, not political firebrands. Edwin Starr, a soul singer barely known outside Detroit, steps forward. He asks, "If they won't do it, I will." He volunteers to re-record the song, with one condition: he gets to sing it, unfiltered with feeling. When he steps into the booth that day, the song was fresh. No second thoughts, no retakes. He sings it raw, between heavy drums, horns, clavinets, crafted by producer Norman Whitfield. He sings it once. That one take, electric, unrestrained, goes out that night to radio. No polish, no polishing, just urgency. By late August, War is #1. 3 consecutive weeks on Billboard. It dethroned the Beatles. It resonated with a generation that felt they were dying in someone else's name. But backlash erupts immediately. Some stations ban it. Critics accuse it of being anti-American, threatening even. Edwin calls it a love song to humanity, not anti-country, just anti-war. Here's what's often missed. The Temptations version hadn't flopped. It just didn't have permission to push boundaries. But that version stirred voices across campuses until Starr gave it wings. Starr himself was no superstar at Motown. Though he'd had a small hit with 25 Miles, he volunteered because he felt the song needed a voice. And on that day, he became its megaphone. Later in life, he would re-record War for New Crises, Columbine, nuclear fears, climate threats, saying the song must evolve with the world. His version became a template for protest in sound. No metaphors, no riddles, just blunt truth. War. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. It's only 3 minutes long, but feels heavier than hours. And in its echo, generations found something to say. The horns fade. The beat softens. The message was loud. The truth, undeniable. But sometimes, the danger doesn't knock. It whispers. It moves in the shadows, under headlines, behind closed doors, in riots and broken radios. The next story isn't shouted, it's felt. And it begins with one of the darkest chords ever strummed into the American sky. A storm is coming, and there's only one thing left to find: shelter. You're with Mick Richards in London, leaning out a high flat window as a sudden storm swallows the city. Thunder cracks, people scramble. That swirl of noise, panic, instinct, survival, plants in Keith the germ of an idea: shelter. Months later, they're in the studio, about to open Let It Bleed. Jagger strums the ominous chord, but something still feels missing. Mary Clayton receives a phone call in the middle of the night. She's 4 months pregnant. She answers. She sings. In curlers. At midnight. That second voice, cutting in on the third verse, raises the stakes. When she shouts, "Rape! Murder! It's just a shot away!" Her voice cracks. That moment heightens everything. A visceral anchor in darkness. They sent the rough version, guitar snapping, piano haunting, soul in overdrive, to press without hesitation. It wasn't polished, it didn't need to be. But then comes the darker echo, the Altamont Free concert. As Gimme Shelter plays live, tragedy erupts. An 18-year-old named Meredith Hunter pulls a gun. A Hell's Angel stabs him dead in front of the stage. It becomes the closing scene of their film Gimme Shelter, but it happened live, as a real nightmare unfolding. The contradiction crushes the dream. Peace turns violent in seconds. Lights and riffs don't protect you from bloodshed. Unlike protest folk songs that ask questions, Gimme Shelter throws a mirror. War isn't on the battlefield anymore. It's on the broadcast. It's backstage. It's beneath your skin. Clayton's vocals? They were borrowed from a call in the night. She drove home afterward and lost her baby that night. Keith lost a guitar during the session. Its neck literally snapped off as he played. That fractured instrument carried the weight of the song. It opened their album, but sucked air out of the 60s final moments. The song didn't preach, it witnessed. You listen and hear thunder. Not just a storm outside, a storm inside. And in the studio's distant echo, it whispers, "Gimme shelter." Before it's too late. The storm quiets, the warning ends, the noise fades into static. And all that's left is one final sound. Not a scream, not a sermon, but a song. One we've all heard, but never like this. No words, just distortion. A single man, a single guitar, standing alone on a stage that was never meant to hold what came next. This last story isn't told with verses. It's told with feedback, and it echoes louder than any anthem ever played straight. The sky is pale and the crowd is thin. It's early Monday, August 18th, 1969. Most of the peace and music pilgrims have gone, but at Woodstock's muddy stage, one man still stands. Jimi Hendrix steps up, electric guitar in hand. He surveys what's left of the audience. Weariness, rain, regret. Then he plays, not love songs, not demands. He plays the flag. The familiar melody begins nearly straight, chord by chord, but as he reaches the rocket's red glare, something changes. Distortion climbs. Feedback echoes like artillery. The whammy bar dives mimic bombs. A rhythmic burst, chaotic but precise. He doesn't attempt to sing. He paints with electricity. Melodies fracture and reform. Near the end, Hendrix slips into taps, the bugle call for funerals. It's subtle, mournful, a waltz of memory in a wounded America. Then he lets the last note scream, long, vibrating, unresolved. He doesn't bow. He doesn't look at the flag. He just steps off the stage into static. Some say it was anti-war. Others call it un-American. But Hendrix? He said simply, "I'm American, so I played it." He thought it beautiful, and that was exactly the point. Expectations shattered, patriotism challenged, art redefined. Few know this. Hendrix was in the Army Reserve before he was famous, assigned to the 101st Airborne. Part of him had seen both sides. He played the anthem not in defiance, but in remembrance. It wasn't rehearsed, not deeply. It was sound painting, a reflection of the air of America in 1969. Charged, chaotic, hopeful. 3 weeks later on television, he told viewers, "All I did was play it." He seemed surprised by the reaction. Letters of hate flowed in, but the anthem went on, unwavering. Woodstock's documentary ends on this sound. It wasn't a crescendo. It was a wake. A sonic eulogy, unfinished. The melody returned to stages, films, classrooms. When you hear it now, the guitar distortion isn't just noise. It's regret. It's hope. It's unanswered question. And in the static, you realize this wasn't just a song. It was America, in 1969, unraveled, played, and laid bare. The distortion fades. The flag falls silent. And just like that, the stories have been told. Not as headlines, not as history books, but as lullabies. The Sleepy Side B closes tonight on a note of reflection, not resolution. A final whisper of vinyl and ghosts. A lullaby of chaos. A flag drenched in distortion. Not all songs were made to comfort. Some were meant to remember. And somewhere out there, if the wind is quiet enough, you might still hear them. If you made it here, thank you. Thank you for traveling through time with us, remembering these songs, remembering what music tried to say when the world wasn't ready to hear it. The Sleepy Side B is just getting started. If these songs moved you or soothed you, we hope you'll subscribe. More stories are on the way. Some loud, some forgotten, all worth dreaming through. Until next time, sleep soft, dear traveller,